Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, good to see you here today.
It's great to see you, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Very, very good. And guess what? It's Friday. We get to talk about economics. And guess what? We'll refresh our information about the Federal Reserve. Do you remember our position on the Fed, don't you?
I do.
We're not in favor of the Fed. We're supposed to not only expose it and have an audit of the Fed, because then everybody want to get rid of it, but we do want to get rid of the Fed. Just think of how many years we went in our early years. We didn't have a Fed. It wasn't authorized in the Constitution, and it took a lot of finagling to finally have them sneak it in one Christmas Eve way back in 1913, and we've been suffering ever since. Back there in 1913, the ratio of the dollar to gold was $20 to the ounce, and guess what? It's $2,000 now. Good night. I think they must be printing a lot of money, and their goal, Christopher, is always to produce prosperity. If you print the money and they equate GDP with the money printed, and guess what? I don't think that's the case, because they've been printing for as long as I can remember. But right now the big argument going on in Washington has to do with the Fed and has to do with the stimulus. But they don't want to talk about the Fed. They're talking about the stimulus, and it's really significant because one day if they say one little phrase that sounds like, oh, we're going to hold off on the stimulus, the market goes down 500 points. But if the next day they say, well, maybe we do need the stimulus. Maybe the Congress should spend more money, and the market goes up 600 points. So that's on again, off again. I don't think that's good, stable economic growth that we're dealing with. It's a lot of wild-eyed speculations and different information and a misunderstanding of monetary policy. But it is the stimulus is the big deal, and right now, there's a little argument going on, and this argument has been going around ever since I've been involved in Washington with the Federal Reserve, and that is when something has to be done and the Fed is messing up, it's never the Fed's fault. Republicans and Democrats sort of avoid really coming down hard on the Fed. They will come down hard, on political parties, but the Fed will always have an opinion about this if things are, if there's too much inflation or not enough inflation and we have economic problems. They say, well, what we have to do is we have to get the Congress to do their part. And they need to spend more money. Just after looking at the money they've spent, historic highs right now in this last year, or especially since coronavirus, spending like crazy and printing like crazy. And they're saying, well, the Congress needs to do more. And Chris, the one point I have made, and I want to make it again, is it seems like a silly argument to us who know exactly what the Congress would do. Well, let's say the Congress yields to the Federal Reserve Board chairman, and they say, oh, well, the Fed warned us, and we're putting too much pressure on the Fed to manipulate monetary policy, so we have to do more to help the Fed out. We need to spend more money. Deficits don't matter. We all learned that in college. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and print more money. If they do, they're not going to raise revenues. Even if they try to, but the economy isn't strong enough to raise revenues. So what happens? They have to borrow the money. They issue treasury bills. Somebody has to buy those treasury bills, and eventually the only way you'll have enough people buying them to keep this mischief going on is the Fed will have to buy them. Why? How come the Fed can do this? Oh, they create the money out of thin air. That's an easy job. It's called inflation. It's called monetary inflation. So this idea that if the Congress spends the money or the Fed creates the money just up front, that there's a big difference. Absolutely nothing. Big government, and they finance big government in so many different ways. When the bailout came in 2008 and 2009, they did it in different ways. The Congress did a lot, but the Federal Reserve did a lot too. So they're back at the same thing, same problem, mainly because they're working on this myth that they know what to do. They know what the money supply should be. They know what interest rates should be. They know how to have central economic planning. They know how to preserve the welfare state. They know how to defeat coronavirus, on and on. But that's all mystical. But unfortunately, Chris, too many people believe in it, and they're still having high hopes. The Fed will take care of us, and the spenders in Congress will come to our rescue.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's just not true. And really, you just need to know basic, simple economics. You know, an increase in wealth is an increase in goods and services in an economy. It's not an increase in money. The purpose of money is to help facilitate trade. It frees us from barter. So if I grow tomatoes and I want to go buy a chicken from a chicken farmer, I have to hope that he wants tomatoes. Otherwise, I can't buy his chickens. Money smooths all this out, and it frees us from a primitive barter system. But the wealth in the economy is not the money. It's the chicken, it's the tomato, it's the goods and the services. But, you know, in Washington, they're just saying print more money, stimulate. And they're just, it's not accomplishing what they want it to accomplish. It doesn't create more wealth. All it does is it makes the dollars that we have worth less. So people, when they get their $1,200 checks, they're happy. Oh, look, government gave me a $1,200 check. But then a few weeks and months later, they're like, oh, look, my electric bill's going up. My grocery bill is going up. So you don't get something for nothing in this world. It's backwards to believe that that's how it is, and that's why standards of living in America are going down.
And, you know, the important thing here, as you described it so well, is when they abandoned just outright bartering, which was clumsy, and they came up, they needed something to substitute for that bartering, and of course it was the use of money. And the natural money, the thing that people generally agreed to was the precious metals, and they were definable. And this was the important thing. In the economy, you have to have something definable because you're going to operate in a voluntary sense about buying and selling and estimating values and all these things. But what if the unit that you're using it varies from day to day? One day it's worth more than the other day. You know, to me, it reminds me of trying to build a skyscraper with a measuring rod. That if you're measuring it by yards, you know, what if the yard changed its definition? You know, the building wouldn't do too well, and it would probably collapse after a while. They get away with it, but they don't. They keep doing it, and there's no definition. And then the other way you get value to make these economic decisions is so important is that true capital, as strange as it might seem to some people, capital comes from savings. It doesn't come from the Federal Reserve. But they pretend that the Fed, if they create money out of thin air, that becomes capital. No, it comes from savings. So the most important price in a market economy might be the most important price entirely, because everything gets priced in the in the currency and the interest rates. So the interest rates are totally manipulated. You know, here we're working with interest rates now down 0%, and is it any wonder that we have these troubles? And what do, Chris? We see it. They have problems, and everybody right now, what I see on this stimulus is the problem is the coronavirus. They see 100% of the cause is the coronavirus, and there's a lot more to it than that. It has to do with the loss of the purchasing power and accuracy of what the monetary unit is all about. And I have talked about September 17th of last year when that overnight rate broke down, and then overnight rates soared to 10%. At the same time, it was recognized by the Fed, hey, we've been just trying to shrink the balance sheet and get back to normalcy. And they gave up on it. They gave up on it totally, completely. They said, we will print the money at will. And they've been continue to do it. But Chris, the point you make is it isn't working because wealth isn't increasing. And the other part of no real wealth increasing is the part that does increase goes to 3% of the people, but the average person suffers the consequence. So this has big political consequence, and this is the reason why, if we don't understand this, that most people will capitulate, to the Marxist system, that they will take care of you and they will, provide anything you need, and we will remain a world empire. And it's all a myth. But I think the myth will become more evident as time goes on, and people will have to say, we can't keep doing it. So usually by the time you get to the model of Venezuela, they back off. But even now, they still haven't backed off in some of those countries. Anything to patch it up together and hold it together for as long as possible. But eventually, it has to collapse. It's an unworkable system, and it's probably amazing that the dollar has held together as long as it's had. But recently now, and one of the reasons that gold's going up is the estimation of the real value of the dollars is going down, and in relationship to the other currencies. And that's really not saying much for the other currencies if the dollar can go down against the foreign currencies. But anyway, it's in flux now, and it's very shaky. And this whole thing, that if we could just get those Republicans and Democrats to agree on the amount of stimulus so we can buy all the weapons we need and run the welfare state as we need it, and everything will be okay. I'm going to make a really wild prediction. I predict it's going to fail.
I agree with that prediction, Dr. Paul. As we're mentioning, money is not the wealth, but goods and services are. There are ways to increase actual wealth, goods and services, but you have to address the bottleneck in the economy. And the bottleneck in America could not be more obvious. We have the biggest government in the history of the world, out of any country to ever exist. This is the bottleneck that stops us from the wealth creation that we could potentially be creating. And they have to cut spending drastically. We have to get rid of the income tax. We have 1,000 military bases peppered all over the world. Is it any wonder that wealth isn't created here? We have to pay for all of this. We have to get rid of all the endless bureaucracy, the red tape, the regulations, and Americans will once again be freed to go and produce and to trade with others. That's the bottleneck that is holding us up. And to think that counterfeiting more money will fix anything is absolutely backwards.
I usually try to go back to the most important thing that leads to this, and you've pointed out where we've been and what is happening. But how does it happen? How does a country like America all of a sudden start accepting these mystical statements about the economy and why it's not necessary to have a monetary unit that you can define and be used and be more trustworthy and let the market work, let voluntarism work? How does it happen? Does it happen overnight? No, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. It takes indoctrination, and that's where the real harm is done. The people get indoctrinated, in an educational system. So long term, if you want to understand what's happening here with the economy and what's happening to our country, is you'd have to say, how do people get indoctrinated? What's the most common thing? And it's government schools. Government run schools, and guess what? Government run schools, their prime purpose is to protect the government's authority. And therefore, guess who supports that? Conservatives and liberals for different reasons. But even on this argument now about the stimulus, they're arguing over the amount, a dollar here and a dollar there. But the Republicans are, they're now pushing more money for more weapons, and they're pushing the bailout for the airline. And the Democrats are just, for more welfareism. But they both, they'll split that and support both because they want the bill to have passed. But I don't think it would happen if we didn't have this monopoly effort in the educational system, whether even in grade school. When you look at some of the things taught even in kindergarten and all, when it comes to environmentalism and economics, it's been there for a long time. And another part of this, economics, we talk about, and Chris, you mentioned the foreign policy, the ridiculousness of the foreign policy. But what about the understanding of personal liberty, personal rights, and what the revolution was supposedly supposed to be all about, and how we have a First Amendment that's to protect us, and other parts of the Constitution that was supposed to protect it. That is totally misunderstood and ignored, and they now accept the liberal Soviet type of explanation that, you have to have a modern explanation by the Constitution. The Constitution, you don't get your permission from the Constitution. You can do whatever you want as long as the Constitution doesn't have a strict prohibition. And it's exactly opposite of that. You can't do anything unless the government gives you permission to do it. And that is not explained. That shouldn't be that hard to teach that to a 10-year-old. But no, the indoctrination is the other thing. You have to do this, and if you don't, you're unpatriotic, you're not supporting the wars, and you're not supporting the poor people, and people will starve. At the same time, we look at the statistics of the results of what we've been putting up with, and 90% of the people are getting poorer. And 10% are getting much richer. And so the wealth is gravitating to the rich. Although everything we do is designed to say, oh, we're going to follow this liberalism because, well, we have to do. It's unfair, and therefore we're going to use force to take from him, and we know how to distribute the wealth. Well, they don't. All they know how to do is protect the special interests, and the special interests get protected. So if you're in the military-industrial complex, you might be a lot safer off right now than if you're in a business where you have to go it along and get no benefits from the government. So I think for us to reverse our trend, we're going to have to get a lot of people understanding and working toward a system of government that we don't permit the government, the monopolized educational system, to indoctrinate our children.
That's great, Dr. Paul. I'm going to close by saying, our political classes for a very long time, they've been trying to live out their imaginations. They, like you said, this mysticism, these glamorous ends and goals that they have. Most of it is absolutely impossible. There are no means on this planet to achieve those goals. And the other stuff, there's insufficient means, meaning government force can't do it. And if you think about, this last century, go look back at presidential speeches, how they're going to remake the world, bring freedom around the world. They've done no such thing. They've destroyed countries. They've turned them into dust. People got rich off of it, but they remade nothing. And then here in our country, there are people that live by the philosophy that theft is the way to peace and prosperity, that stealing from one and giving to another is the way that it's going to work. And yet, more poverty is created as a result. Should we be surprised? I mean, all you have to do is go back to the 10 Commandments. Do not steal. And then finally, you have the Fed, with price fixing and counterfeiting, and they're going to run the economy doing these two things. They do no such thing. They've created nothing but havoc. But in all of these aspects, they just keep doubling down. They just keep doing more. The wars keep going. The welfare keeps going. The price fixing and counterfeiting keeps going. And that's probably how it's going to be until they're finally bankrupt. But at that moment or time or span of years, freedom will have a chance. Freedom will be very attractive during that time. And hopefully our show helps contribute to people understanding the ideas of freedom.
Very, very good. And when we think about this and the difficulties we have, the explanation that I made an attempt to give you about the bipartisanship that comes as a consequence of the way we're educated and indoctrinated about monetary policy and foreign policy and all these things. So it is bipartisan. There is a difference. People say, well, you can't argue the case if you're talking to a wild-eyed liberal. They say you can't argue that the Republicans are essentially the same as the Democrats, and vice versa. They'll do it. But there is this whole principle though of whether or not they endorse the principle that the government has the authority to use force and intimidate people to do exactly what the bureaucrats want us to do. That's what we're suffering from right now because there's no understanding of the Constitution. But fortunately, they're gaining some understanding. But they had no qualms about the violation of civil liberties as they proposed all the legislation and the rules to deal with coronavirus, never really having the statistics to prove that it was as dangerous as they claim it was. So this is the thing that is important, that we end up with the bipartisanship and the support from these ideas. And I think that the time has come where people are going to decide we better do some serious thinking because things aren't going that well. And the Republicans right now are in a tight race in the presidential race with the Democrats, and people would say, and I'm sure I get challenged, I do get challenged. They'll say, oh no, you criticize the Republicans. And the Democrats are so much worse. And therefore they say that, I'm on the wrong track. Well, I think there's room for the position that I hold, is that when the Republicans use violence and force to redistribute wealth and run up the bills and spend more than the Democrats sometimes, we should point it out. And the Democrats, are very well identified with spending and all. But I think eventually, though, people would have to settle down. I'd like it to be a much cleaner deal. People for liberty and people for tyranny. It'd be easy, but it's never that simple. And so therefore, I would say, yes, I'm complaining. It's all this deficits and spending and Federal Reserve stuff and war. It's too much bipartisan. We should recognize that. But if you're forced into saying, well, who do you think has the least respect for liberty in this country as a general issue of Republicans and Democrats? Well, I know some Democrats that are very good compared to Republicans, but basically the image that the Democrats give us for what they want to do, their respect for the Constitution and liberty, I think just a bit less than the Republican. But I think that is secondary to the understanding of the principles that we have to endorse and get people, Republicans or Democrats, conservatives or liberals, moving in the direction of what it's like to live in a free society, and why some of those principles that the founders gave us should be thought about and really taken serious consideration, because it's in the cause of liberty where I find the solution to so many of our problems. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.